Welcome to the MMHP in the 989. Channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history from the city by the bay. And now, here's your host, Scott Baker.
We're back here at Studio 163, and the bridge just opened, one of our many bridges here in Bay City, and just like half hour ago, and nobody knows about it yet. It's kind of weird having all these bridges that are broken.
Well, it was on the TV 12 news.
It was on TV5 too.
Okay.
Yeah, that's when I saw him going across them. But I'm just laughing about it because Center Avenue has been dead for 3 days. Like nobody's been on it. It's
yeah, we
really
walked downtown today. It was strange.
Yeah.
The one ways. Usually, all kinds of traffic on those, and just like, whoa,
and
so different.
And the end of winter, and they were talking March. They're going to close the Lafayette Bridge to fix that one. So that would be 3 of 4 down.
Yeah, that would be chaos. Absolute chaos.
Everybody getting funneled over the Trumbull Bridge on the north part.
Right.
It'd be interesting. But we are here at the studio. Everybody's in the house. We're having one more big brouhaha here before the Christmas break. Mr. Mike's in the house. How's things going, Mike?
Right, as always.
Are you going to be starting a new blog for us or something on our page?
Your suggestion. We got to talk about that later.
Okay. Mike's going to... We have Sir Fred and Dr. J here that do weekend album picks, and Mike's going to probably do a local review of music, whether it be something current, which is mainly what it's going to be about, and maybe even throw in an old one there if there's a throwback gig that he's got footage of, because he's been documenting footage for bands locally and nationally for many years now. So Mike will be our Friday poster on the MMHP 989 page on Facebook, where we put up those informational tidbits. And
I have one prepared for tomorrow.
Wonderful. We'll be kicking it off tomorrow. All right. Good.
What did I call it?
I don't know. You have a good name for it.
Pink-shaped puzzle.
There you go.
Which is a combination of
Hellbound Drifters. Hellbound Drifters.
Yeah, combination of Hellbound Drifters and Odd-shaped
puzzle.
An
odd-shaped puzzle. And it's when they did a jam. Yep. Nice little tidbit. 2 original bands that had a little cover band jam at the end of the night.
Yep.
Okay. Here in Bay City.
Pink Floyd. Yep.
Okay.
So, Mike, do you have the? Did you record the Sarah Shook and Disarmers at BMO's when she appeared?
No.
It would have been 4 years ago or 3 years ago. Yeah. That was a good night too.
I started going there frequently the last 2 years. So.
Same with the Marcus King.
Marcus King.
All those shows he did. Did you do any of those?
No.
So we had some on the way up stars come through town here, and that was
Dan Auerbach produced his new record.
Yeah.
Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys.
Yeah.
So he's getting up there in the world.
Yeah. We had Blackberry Smoke here in the early around 2010 or 2009 or something. I opened for them. They came in for a beer festival near downtown, and the very next year they were on tour with the Allman Brothers, and here they go. It was like, who would have thought? But they came up, and
Well, it's
it was
fun when
nice.
you can catch somebody on the way up.
Yeah.
In a small venue. And of course, in Bay City, it's going to be a small venue.
Yeah, for sure. How you doing, Dr. J?
Doing real well. Working on a few things at the museum. Curating a couple items there. So, got a couple things in the works at the museum. So, it's kind of an ongoing operation over there. And real happy with it.
Wonderful. Well, I just saw a post not too long ago, and I forgot to bring it up to you, that a friend of mine, Chris Skiba, he happened to do a little post on all the stuff you have over at Scotty's Sandbar. And he featured 2 different posts on all the artists that you have hanging on the wall there. And he wasn't aware, I don't think, that the main part of it is downtown at the museum there. And
we're occupying both sides of the river.
Heck
there.
Yeah.
We want to discriminate against the west side or the east side.
We got it going on. Sir Fred, what's going on?
Well, still looking for records every day.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't been finding anything lately, but working on it.
How well are you done with that book right now? I mean, we're going to be into January 2023 coming up here in a few weeks.
Told the guy who did my cover that I may take out the Tejano music because I can't find. No one is writing me
back.
Mm-hmm. Not like the polka thing. I mean, I could write a whole book on polka bands, but I don't want to. But it's been right now. I was working on it this morning, and then right now I'm just trying to put it all together and to delete some things because I got too many pages.
Okay. We just jumped 100 plus people on Facebook with the Gilmore Brothers post that went up last week. It was an immediate jump. Like we just went into orbit.
Yeah, that was cool.
It started blowing our page up again like it does every so often. We get the right band on there. And
well, I see some 4,500 people looked at it or whatever that is.
Yeah, and it was triggering all sorts of stuff, so I did a big promo on it on our page and on the history pages for Saginaw Bay City.
I think the reason was we finally revealed Fred's situation there. Jailhouse
Blues, yeah. Yeah. I was actually skimming the net for the photos from up there up north, but couldn't come across them for our podcast, so
looking for a photo of Fred with a number in front of him.
He told the story correctly.
That was a great show. Part 2 will be out this coming Thursday too. So those guys were all tuned in, real happy to hear from it. So.
Hear the tale of Eddie and the Eatouts.
Oh yeah, and that's the next step to their big national stage. That's cool. And we got in the house today the one, the only, the low end man of Crazy Chestur, Mr. Tom Ball. How are you doing?
Great. Looking forward to talking with y'all today, and hopefully it'll warm up before we leave.
There you go. Yeah,
that's wishful.
That's what a nap will do for you. I want to let Sir Fred lead us into the questioning with you tonight. You have a very extensive background, and you also have your own radio show.
I do. On WCMU Public Radio.
Yeah, can you give us the time and the name of the show?
Yes, it's called Homespun. It's at 3:00 in the afternoon on WCMU, and
every day.
Every Sunday. Sunday from 3 to 4.
Okay.
So it's on for an hour. It originally started in the 80s as a 3-hour Saturday night live show. And from 8 until 11, and I split time with other co-hosts for a while, and I seemed to be the constant as it went on. Some people people came in, some people left, and it went down to 2 hours, and then it just fell to me. Robert Barclay was my last co-host, and that was 35 or 6 years ago now. But he decided he wanted to host a blues show on WCMU Public Radio, and he went and did that. It's called the Juke Joint. It's been moderately successful, one might say. So I just I didn't at that point. It was an hour show, and it was moved to Sundays, and so I'm from 4 to 5 for quite a long time, and then just the way programming changes came about, it got moved to 3:00, and that's where I've been for quite a while.
Well, I was preceding introducing you with a little bit of the comments of our big show because Mike Johnston, another bass playing radio DJ that goes on after the blues show, he has his own show on WCMU. He had our biggest show for the longest time, and he's still number 2, like our biggest downloaded podcast.
Wow.
With Northwoods Improvisers, and talking about his show. But
he's
it's that
really
time.
He is really, I'd say he's probably one of my oldest friends. I met Mike Johnston when we were probably both 17 or 18, and I was living in Cadillac, Michigan at the time, and I would go to Traverse City to shop and to hang out, and he was he worked in this little record store called Music Movers on, I think it was on 8th Street actually, and it was I think it must have been a December or January day because it was kind of a cold day, and there was a big glass window with a little bench, and the first time I went there, it was a sunny day. He was sitting in the window trying to probably kind of just get some warmth, and I met him, and we just became longtime friends, and I'd say he's probably one of my oldest friends in my early adult era, even through today, and we kind of kept track with one another, and now we're colleagues, Well,
I'm going to keep hitting both you guys to get Barclay to join us so we have the trifecta, because he's the only one that we've been attempting to get that. Now we got the bookends. We need Robert involved too, so that'd be kind of cool.
I'll pass along the good word for you, because he would be very interesting, I think. He's a great storyteller. He has that knowledge of remembering times and dates and people, and as a photographer, that's what he did in his professional life at Central Michigan University. But he also shot lots of pictures as a freelancer too. I'll work my voodoo the best I can to,
that's great.
He doesn't stray too far from the farm, quote unquote, these days, but I think he would be a very interesting guest.
Oh man! Well, let's get your show under tow here. Freddie, you want to fire off some good stuff?
Yeah, as long as we're talking about Tom's show, what exactly do you play on Homespun?
Homespun is I'll call it a traditional music, quote unquote, show. Although that is a pretty broad brush. It's some would say, well, it's a folk music show, and it is that, certainly. There's blues, and there's bluegrass, and there's old time music, and there's singer songwriters, and there's contemporary songwriters, and Western swing music, and I don't want to say early jazz, but there is that bridge sometimes of those musics. They all collide at some point. And even I would say on occasion, if it's the right world music, I try to, if there's something interesting, I like to throw in a set of that too. So it being, 57 actual minutes, sometimes it's hard to cram all that stuff into one show, which I typically don't. I have to say, I probably lean on bluegrass a little bit because it's pretty popular these days, and there's a lot of people making that music. But that's the general outline of the show.
Okay.
Do you have a lot of mail feedback? Not mail as in mails, but email feedback or anything for that show? Like Billy Strings has got to be played or anything like that?
I get the emails I get primarily are, hey, great show today. Really like that piece by X that you played, today.
Thank you. That's great.
I get those kinds of things. Not a lot, but I also know that people are listening, and they don't necessarily, they're not verbal, I did get an email from a former professor at Central Michigan University who I know a number of months ago now about a piece of music I played, and it was a piece by Uncle Dave Macon, who was a very famous Grand Ole Opry star and made records and performed around the United States. But I think there was a bit of racial, sexual connotation of the song, and she was just we had a couple of email exchanges asking, and it wasn't she was offended, but she didn't quite understand some of the terminology and the time period that those songs were being made, so it was a spirited conversation, I'll say that. And again, it didn't go on for very long, but because she's a very, very smart lady, and I was glad she was listening. And it's not every day you get a comment on an Uncle Dave Macon piece that you might play. He's not a household name. He was at one time. He's very, very popular. Well, probably one of the most popular artists on the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah, there's a little bit of video of Uncle Dave out there that's pretty interesting to watch him.
Yeah, there is. So generally, that's what the show is. I always say the greatest thing about the show is that nobody really tells me what to play.
Great.
I get to pick my. So I would say the station has enough faith into me that says, go ahead, do your thing, because we know you're going to keep the best interest of the station in mind and keep the FCC off our back and so it's been enlightening, to say the least, to not have that thumb over you, program director or station manager or somebody saying, maybe you could do this instead of this, so
that whole thing kind of took a lot of the fun out of being a DJ, I think.
And it's
radio,
and as we all know, in the commercial world, it's not like that at all. It's here's your playlist, play these songs at this time, and it's a whole different feel. And public radio, I've never had anybody tell me. We've had conversations about delivery and those sort of little things to make sure you're putting out the best show you can professionally, but musically, I guess you get to do my thing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, sounds great.
Huh.
Were you involved with the Wheatland Festival at the very beginning? Because we played at the very first one.
No, I wasn't, Fred. I went to the very first Wheatland Festival in that little cornfield just east of Remus. But I saw a picture of us playing, but I have no memory of it. Yes, I've been to every festival that we, obviously during COVID we didn't have one for 2 years, but
isn't it up to like 49?
This is year 50 coming up in 23.
50?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I've been to all of them. I'd say it was probably, I would say it was probably about the 6th annual when I started to volunteer for the organization. They were always looking for people to help. And I had moved to the area, and I thought, this looks like a great thing, and I started volunteering for the organization, and I still volunteer to this day. I sat on their board of directors for a very long time.
Yeah, I thought you were.
Yeah, and I just stepped off that about a year and a half ago.
Tom, maybe you could tell any of the listeners who aren't familiar with the Wheatland Festival, what exactly is it? Kind of describe.
Yeah,
it's a big one.
How long it is?
Yeah, it's obviously I'll say again somewhat of a traditional music festival. Much the same genres that we talked about a few minutes ago on the radio program of bluegrass and old time music and Celtic music and Cajun music and some world music. Dance has always been a very big part of the festival. The music organization is based out of Remus, Michigan, and they own property out there. After the first festival, they were looking for another place to hold it, and at the time, Mark Wernett was the postmaster of the post office in Remus, and story has it, I wasn't involved in this, but story has it there were a couple of the organizers that lived in that area and that got their mail at the post office, and they had met Mark and befriended him, and they were talking about how they were looking for a place to have the event again, and Mark said, well, why don't you come out and look at my property? Him and his wife had 160 acres just west and slightly south of Remus, and some of the organizers went out there and looked at the property and thought this could work, and the the rest is history, as they say.
Been there ever since.
It started up at there, yeah, and it went on while Mark and Gladys were alive, and they were huge supporters of the organization. They thought we were doing a really great service for Mecosta County, where Remus is, and for the community. And upon their passing, the idea was, I think the kids were going to take over the property, but none of the kids of the family, they had 3 or 4 kids, I think. None of them really wanted the property. And so I think before Mark passed away, his wife Gladys passed away before he did, but there was a discussion about the organization maybe buying the property as a whole. We had purchased a little bit of it for our offices and that sort of thing. So we ended up buying the whole quarter section, which is a tremendous piece of property. And
is this a day long or 2 day?
It is a 3-day festival.
Okay.
Usually Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Again, all those musics involved are there. We have a pretty big dance stage too. So again, the dance is performance dance, and then just dancing in general has been a real big part of the organization. Also through many years, from starting out with the Greengrass Cloggers in the late 70s. They came up from North Carolina, were a huge hit for the festival goers, and people like that style of dance. And so there's that aspect of it. And again, it's over 3 days, so it's probably today I'd say there's between 10 and 12,000 through the weekend, probably. So it's probably one of the biggest events in the Midwest. And people come and camp on the property, rough camping or trailer camping. Are
the performances in a tent, or is it all open stage?
No, there's a very large main stage, and then there are 2 other side stages. One's more of a big tent. It's our Centennial stage. There's that probably holds maybe 700 or 800 people total. You know, it's a little more intimate. The main stage area probably on a full day could hold probably 6,000 or 7,000 people. Wow. It's a pretty big space. The stage is pretty large. And then there's a dance stage too in back of that. That's a permanent structure. And then we have some workshop areas where you can go get hands-on instruction if you want from down in the woods, all acoustically. There's benches you can sit around and talk to people about their craft. And then just in the last couple of years, we created this songwriter stage also. That was a tent for a couple of years, and then we had a donor give us some money, and we put up a little permanent structure there too. Again, the interesting thing about the Wheatland Music Organization is that it's generational now. There are now people who came as kids who are now adults, and they have their own kids, and parents and grandparents have been coming, and so every once in a while you'll run into folks like the Schaefer family who gave us a really nice gift and said, we want to support the organization financially. How can we do that? And we had discussion, and they helped fund this stage project. So
is this always run about the same time every year?
Yes, it's always been the first weekend after Labor Day for really since the second. The first festival was in August, I think it was, yeah. And then it got moved to the first weekend after Labor Day, and it's been living there ever since.
What does a ticket typically cost?
Today, a weekend ticket is it's probably around $100 or so, I think. Okay. And the only day ticket we really sell is Sunday, because it's just hard to get to sell day tickets on that to push people in and off the festival. Most people, when they come, they come Friday morning and don't leave till late Sunday afternoon. So it is a weekend long. It's really a reunion for a lot of people too, I think. You're
camping there. I mean, that certainly cuts a lot of the costs down.
Right. Well, and the fact is that there are people that have been coming for a long time now, and they tend to camp in the same area with the same people, and so you just create these relationships. Right. Usually it's a reunion every year. I mean, sometimes they live miles and miles apart from one another, so this is an opportunity for them to get back together and to visit and have a great weekend of music and fellowship too. So
yeah,
wonderful. Wow,
sounds good. I really didn't know very much about this.
It's an amazing organization, in as much as the fact that it's, there's a board of directors and that sort of thing, but it's just we've really been funded for years by the festival being successful. It has allowed us to do other smaller projects during the year. We also have a small traditional arts weekend over Memorial Day weekend. That's really a number of 100 people at best. That's instruction and music and that sort of thing too.
Yeah.
There were times when we would put performances in schools when artists were traveling through. We haven't done that so much anymore, but we used to do it pretty regular. So it's we never really had to rely on corporate support, if you will. Mm-hmm. We've always kind of laughed about the fact that we don't have a Budweiser stage and we don't have a Microsoft tent or right. that kind of a thing. So
how refreshing.
Well, it is. It really is refreshing because typically when those kinds of things happen, strings are attached sometimes.
Yeah.
So we're very fortunate that no one's telling us what to do. When you live by the sword, you die by the sword. But fortunately, we've lived by the sword for almost 50 years now. So,
how did you get involved in this music?
I got involved in this music. Interestingly enough, I never even knew about this music when I was in middle school or even into high school. I was a rock and roller.
Just like Charlie Walmsley, right?
Kind of, yeah, in some ways, yes. Now I will say, as I got into my, junior and senior year of high school, that was the very early 70s. So there was that singer-songwriter type era of James Taylor and Arlo Guthrie and Cat Stevens, and there was all that, and I was into poetry some, and so I liked lyric and songwriters and storytellers, those kinds of things. I did like that kind of music, but I never played that kind of music at all. I wasn't playing any instrument, just a fan. But at the same time, I was certainly leaning on Alice Cooper and Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep, and the list kind of goes on and on. The Stones and the Beatles, of course, certainly. But shortly after graduating high school, I ran into a couple of they weren't even classmates of mine, but they were ahead of me a grade in high school, and I started to know them more. I got introduced to them and started hanging out with them, and they were musicians. They played music. A couple of them played guitar. One of the guys played clawhammer banjo and national steel guitar, and this was about 73 or so.
What high school?
Cadillac High School in Cadillac, Michigan.
So were you up there when Kiss came up there too?
I was not. That was
after.
That was in
75 or 6.
I thought it was 6. I think it was. Yeah, and so that all happened after I left.
Okay.
I think I was still in town then, but I was so far removed from.
Really?
Yeah. By that point, I had gone into a complete other direction of folk music by 76.
And so 3 years you made a big change in your listening habits.
I did. Yeah. It was, started hanging out with these guys. A couple of other fellas came to town. One had moved from the Cambridge, Boston area. I don't even know why they were actually there. I think he was in healthcare. He was a male nurse, and his wife, I think, worked in the hospital system. But he was a huge folkie. Because
the folk center.
He is. I think he might be 3 or so years older than me, but he knew about the folk scene in Cambridge and the Boston area, the Combat Zone with Don Stover and the Lilly Brothers and all that in Club 47 in Cambridge and he turned us on to Jim Kweskin and the Jug Band, Tom Rush, Don Stover, the Lilly Brothers. I mean, he had some of those records, but he was also a really great acoustic guitar player.
What was his name?
His name is Roy Nickerson.
And he moved here from?
Yeah, they moved from the Massachusetts area to Cadillac, Michigan.
Boy, that must have been a culture shock.
Yeah, I think so. Well,
wow.
But he wasn't. They didn't actually live in Boston, like in the city. But he was in a close enough proximity to that area where I think he got a chance to go see some of those musicians and that sort of thing. And on top of all that, there was another fellow named Fred Johnson who was. His family lived in Cadillac too, but I never really knew him. And again, he's a couple years older than me. But I met Fred and Roy about the same time because I was hanging out with these other two guys and they introduced me to them. These other two guys were Barry Anderson and Rick Duell. And again, they were class ahead of me, I think, in high school. But anyway, so we started hanging out, and this was in the 73, the beginning of 74, and those three other people were the three people that I went to the first Wheatland Festival with.
So what was it that they brought? Just their diehard listening habits, and you were like, it made you just change your whole idea on listening and tuning into this? What was the trigger?
I don't know exactly, other than the fact that I think I was searching subconsciously for something different. And,
yep.
I want to say I was getting tired of Alice Cooper and Black Sabbath, but it felt like I kind of was the people who I was really hanging out with in high school and that sort of, they were off doing other things too. So it seemed like I was listening to that music less and less. And then, when I ran into these guys, they were listening to other things, and so you go, well, what are you listening to? And Rick Duell started saying, well, I'm listening to Uncle Dave Macon, who we talked about earlier, or gosh, I'm really very interested in Robert Johnson and some of the other blues players, Big Bill Brunzi and those kinds of people, and so. And when I heard that music, I was just floored by it because it was real music. I mean, someone wasn't painting their face and dressing up, and it wasn't loud music. This was real people making real music, and I've just found that interesting. And at that time, again, those guys were all playing music too, so I was thinking, gosh, I want to hang out with these guys some more because they're making music in front of me, and you're going to these people's houses and you're hanging out in their living room, and we're listening to music, but they're playing music too, and I think I secretly always wanted to play an instrument, but never knew what that was. And I said to somebody recently, I never had the wherewithal to say when I was in high school, because there was a band in high school band, but I never had the wherewithal to go to the band room and, on one of my class periods off and go, geez, Mr. Zakrizi, can I just sit in the back of the room? I don't know what I want to do, but I want to, maybe there's an instrument here I want to play, I always kind of, I don't want to say I'm disappointed in myself for not doing that, but it's, hindsight's a beautiful thing, of course. So
looking at that hindsight and stopping right there, what were you listening to growing up with your mom and dad? What did they listen to?
Well,
what was in the house?
They weren't listeners. They weren't music aficionados at all. I mean, they had 5 kids, and so I was one of 5.
So you found your outlet in music a lot.
Well, I did. Although I have an older brother and an older sister. Okay, and they listened to music in high school when they were in high school, so I think there was that moment of there was a little stereo in the house and 45s were big, so every once in a while I might have a couple extra dollars in my pocket, and you go to the discount store and buy a couple of 45s for 77 cents or 99 cents or whatever it was, because you heard things on the radio that you liked, and they had the same thing, and they were buying 45s, and my older brother or sister maybe were buying a few LPs at that point. And again, keep in mind, at that time, the Beatles had already come to America, and the British invasion had happened, and so I was exposed to the Beatles really. I mean, I did see the other television show. I do vaguely remember that, but they also had those records, and so I was getting turned on to that kind of music from them though too. So not necessarily from my mother and father at all.
Did you have any local bands, Michigan-based bands, that you enjoyed while you were listening to your rock era? Or anything that you went to see, or any of those stories that bands come your way up there, and you were like, "Wow, they were just a fantastic band." Right?
No, there was a place in Cadillac. I'll call it a dance club more than anything else. Mm-hmm. It was called the Platters, and it was before my time per se. I mean, the building was there, and I knew it was there, but I was never old enough in its heyday to go there. But I know in that time period, there was a time, I think, when the Supremes actually came there, and some of those kinds of up-and-coming, like Motown acts. I think maybe Smokey was there, Smokey Robinson at one time.
Yeah, that teen club era, that was really a fairly short period of time.
Yeah. So
rightly about 64 through 68.
Yeah.
And
and again, I was, at that point, I mean, I started in I was trying to think in 7th grade. That would have been like 66, 67. So when I went into junior high school, not necessarily, I mean, still kind of
most of them you had to be 15 to get in.
Right. Yeah. And I wasn't even of that age. Plus I didn't, I wasn't driving. My parents had 5 kids. We lived in the country. So you just didn't, there's an era today where you would go, Mom or Dad, take me to this place, and that just didn't happen. We were a frugal family, and you, I don't want to say you stayed on the farm, but that's because you lived in the country. It was a little more of a challenge to go to any of those places. So I wasn't, again, I really probably was introduced to more music from my sisters and brothers than my mother and father.
Oh, wow. And then you met these guys, you're telling the story, and that's when you made a music change, and when you were deeply listening to as it was fulfilling you more than rock was at the time.
Yes, yeah. And I think, just hanging out with those guys, that was my life. I was working a day job, nothing. I wasn't a lawyer or a doctor, so you're working during the day, and at night you're looking for something to do, and these guys were Roy and his wife Laura had a little girl, and they had a house in town, so we'd go and hang out there, and his wife put up with us, and you'd have a few beers and sit around and listen to some music and play some music, and about that time too, I was being introduced to some of those, but about that time we all started really getting introduced to Doc Watson and Norman Blake and that whole real traditional people who were living were making music. Roy again was a really good guitar player, and he was pretty enamored with flat picking when that became a thing, and so we started listening to lots of Doc Watson and Norman Blake, and then subsequently what happens is you're listening to Doc and you're reading liner notes on records, and you find out that his father-in-law is this guy Gaither Carlton, and gosh, who's that guy? Well, he lived down the road from Doc, and and his daughter was Rosalie, and that's Doc's wife, and he was a musician, and gosh, okay, about that time then, you find out that Doc is going out and playing gigs with this guy named Clarence Ashley, and who was a local banjo player and singer, and you're wondering, who in the heck is that guy? And it's almost, I always describe it as you start in the present and you work backwards in music sometimes to find out who all these people really are. And as it went on, we were all just like sponges, you hear these people and wow, who's this guy? Rufus Crisp. Man, I love this guy. And Fred can attest to this. Folkways records at the time were they were the Bible of a lot of that traditional music, because Mo Ash recorded a lot of those guys, and those records were out in stores, but they were also in libraries a lot of times. I found some of those in our local library. Just stumbled on them, and you check them out and you take them home and you listen to them and you go, wow, this is pretty cool. I like this. So consequently, that all took place over, a 3 or 4 year period. And then, and I still wasn't playing any music. In 1974, I did go and buy a guitar. And at the time I think it was a very nice guitar. It wasn't some cheap Guitar Center $200 instrument. I kind of saved up my money, and we went to Guitar's Friend in Stockbridge, Michigan, and there was a little store there, and they had some nice, they had Martins and that kind of thing, and so I bought a guitar and was learning a few chords from I was sitting around all these people who knew what the heck was going on, and we were playing a little music together, and then during that time period, and we were I think we were really heavy into Jim Kweskin at that time because we thought it was pretty cool. And in the jug band, their main bass instrument was Fritz Richmond playing the wash tub bass. and we thought, I thought, wow, how cool is that? And when you would listen to him, you'd think, man, this guy's got it going on, because it's one string, and it's tied to a tub, and he's got a little board underneath it to let the sound come out of it, and he was very good. And one day we got together at Roy and Laura's house, and my friend Fred, who was with us, we're hanging out. He goes to his car. He comes back with a wash tub bass that he'd built. He said, here, I think you should learn how to play this. And because we kind of needed to bottom end. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I stood back and went, okay. And I knew the properties, of it. I knew how it worked. But there was a metal string, and Fritz he wore a glove. Yeah, it was a wire, and because you couldn't play it without a glove because your hand would be torn up.
Yeah.
So for some amount of time, I played it that way, and again, the only way you changed the note was to pull the pole back. You changed the intonation if there was any. There wasn't really, and so I did that for a few months, and then thought that maybe I could change the wire to maybe an actual acoustic bass string. And so I think I went to the local music store and I got a gut string and attached it to the tub, attached it to the pole, and it just became so much easier to play. And it changed the sound because it had some sustain. The wire didn't have a lot of sustain as an acoustic instrument. And so I played that for over a year. And humbly, I think I got pretty proficient at it because it was all ear. You didn't put your finger down anyplace else. You pulled the string and then pulled the pole back if you wanted the note to go higher, or let the tension off it if you wanted it to go lower. So I got pretty proficient ear training wise, and I guess through just watching these other guys and asking questions, I used to start to learn what chords went with what keys and how that all worked. I guess it was a pretty crude form of theory, but it was folk music at the time. That's really what it was.
Did you play out anywhere at this point?
Yes. We the four of us formed a little band called the New Wexford County Rangers. And because we were in Wexford County, that's where Cadillac is in Wexford County. And there was a band at one time, I think in the 20s or 30s. I never heard a note from them, but there was a band called the Wexford County Rangers. And so we thought we would adopt that name and put the new in front of it. And you would play your little art in the park things, and there was a radio show that happened at this little station. It was in like the second floor of this hotel in downtown Cadillac, and we played on that a few times. I would say probably at least a half a dozen times. It was like a talk show, but they would have some entertainment on occasion, and somehow one of the guys knew the host, and we got the chance to go play on the radio for again, I don't know how many gigs exactly, but and I just actually a couple of years ago, Rick Duell had somebody give him I think it was on a thumb drive or something, but some little section of the radio broadcast.
Wow, that's cool.
It was a real blast from the past.
That is cool.
I will say that.
Yeah. That's a treat to have that archive.
Yeah. So consequently, again, I played that for about a year, maybe a little longer, and then realized I needed to move up, and that was in the era of you didn't know where else to go, so you would. So I looked in the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit News, and the classified sections, and there was a musical instruments column, and there was somebody that had a string bass for sale in Windsor, Ontario. And so I think Fred Johnson and I got in my van and we drove to Windsor, Ontario, and went and looked at it, and it was $125, but it had all four strings on it. So, and it was a very basic bass, nothing fancy about it at all, but it worked, and I bought it and brought it home and was pretty happy that there were three other strings on it, and I think again, because it's a lot of those strings are the same strings as there are on guitars, I could sit down and ask questions from my friends saying, okay, this is this string, so if I want this note, where do I put my finger? And again, just through working with them and then being interested in that music, it just sort of happened, and I advanced, I'd have to say, fairly quickly at that point. Wow. So, and it was, and I've been doing it ever since. And that was, I think I got the bass in probably maybe late 75, early 76, I think it was. Must have been early 76, because I think the weather was a little iffy. It might have been like a January kind of thing. I just remember it wasn't it wasn't sunny and hot. I think
Wow.
So
Fantastic story.
So yeah, it's just it's I've said many times it kicked the door wide open for me. Like it was I don't want to say it was like falling into a black hole, but it kind of was, because all this other old music, which I liked and appreciated a lot, I just never saw me having an electric guitar and an amplifier and all. I just never saw myself as that kind of thing. Even say in early junior high, you were hanging out with people who did that kind of stuff, and they played couple of little school dances, and you heard the Shadows of Night Gloria and those kind, and I was hanging out with some of those people, but I didn't see myself playing that kind of music, I guess, at that point. So, and as a sidebar to all this, I want to interject this, because I think this is really important for me personally from a musical standpoint. At that same time, I also met this guy and his wife, Chip Gaddick, and his wife Marcia, and I knew Marcia because she was a local girl, and I think her older sister was a pretty good friend of my older sister too, from high school. So I knew her, but she married this guy, Chip Gaddick, who came from New Jersey, and moved to Cadillac, Michigan, and because he married Marcia.
Cadillac was just booming in the
it was
Wonder Kiss went there.
It was burning up, baby. Yeah. But the thing about Chip was, and I think I met Chip through Rick Duell and some Barry Anderson and some other people that I knew at that time too. They knew him. But Chip never played any music either, but he had older sisters, and he came from New Jersey, which is right next door to New York. So he was exposed to lots of music that wasn't even on my radar at that time, and became friends with them and started hanging out with them some too. And he had a small but pretty unique record collection at that time, and he was the guy who turned me on to David Bowie, Lou Reed, Little Feat, Tower of Power, John Lee Hooker, some jazz people, King Curtis, some of those people that, again, they weren't popular people that were on the radio per se,
right,
and they weren't even in my periphery at that time. But I mean, I just remember hearing Lou Reed Transformer or Ziggy Stardust from David Bowie, and thought, what freaking planet is this coming from? I mean, I was just, again, it was the same thing, like, wow, how did I miss this? Mm-hmm. And then eventually, again, he like I say, he didn't have this huge record collection, but he had some real unique people that all kind of made sense to me, on top of the folk music, and of course he had some jazz records too. So, and he was also really into guys like Red Prysock, and Big J McNeely, who were, those R&B honker saxophone players. And, so he said, listen to this, yeah, my sister Gwen had this Red Prysock record, listen to this, and I just, you're just floored when you hear this stuff, right, because it's, and then eventually it's B.B. King and all, the list sort of goes on and on, but he was a huge influence musically on me too. On top of that, I mean, it was this amalgamation of this big pot of music stew that, again, wasn't even directly, I don't want to say directly connected to the stuff that I was listening to in junior high and high school. I mean, there were, Bob Dylan was there too. I don't want to discount the big guys, the Simon and Garfunkel and those people. I knew about all those people too, and they were pretty cool. But
there's a certain independence, uniqueness to those you mentioned. I mean, whether it be the blues guys, the jazz guys, the R&B guys, or Bowie or Reed, they were indie style at the time.
Yes.
Before they became a household name.
Yeah.
And so you're getting sprinkled this candy here that came out of nowhere that's completely different from your Sabbaths, your Zeppelins, your Beatles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, I only mention him because he, much like those other guys we've been talking about, he was a huge, huge influence on me musically too.
Cool.
And again, it didn't make me want to go out and get an electric guitar or electric bass and go join a rock and roll band, but I thought this was the coolest stuff. And he he just had this way of again, it was music that was left of center, like you say, it probably was independent. I mean, I think about bands like Little Feat, and they were,
even though they were on like national labels at the time, they were such an indie style of music that was my point. Like they're so unique and stylistic.
Right.
What year did the band come into your ears? Because your amalgamation came there to where you're at today.
It did. You're right. And I would have to say, I mean, I didn't own music from Big Pink, but I did start with the Brown album, the band. And that probably, again, that was probably in that same sort of time period, and that wasn't really part of the folk scene so much, but I'm guessing, I don't know exactly, I can't pinpoint it, but I'm guessing the Chip Gaddick probably turned me on to some of that stuff too. He might
to be the album that's really started Americana.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right there, that feeling of even though they were new songs, they had that sound of being from the past.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it did, but even when you look at the songs that they weren't writing but they were recording, they were old songs though. Mm-hmm. They were old country songs, or they were I think of the Lefty Frizzels and those kinds of guys were influenced by the whole group, but probably by Robbie Robertson as much as anybody else because he was writing those songs.
Right.
But I suspect Long Black Veil and those kinds of things were that was part of their wheelhouse too. Right. So I think they were influenced by all that music too, but
So you were still in that was the time period where you finally got in, where you heard the band then too and all that. So
yes, yeah.
Would J.J. Cale come in that period and all that?
Probably later.
Yeah, because Clapton seemed to grab a hold of all that around the same time period too, and when his ears were, and that's the two bands he would go.
Yeah,
those things.
And and I guess probably a little bit as a sidebar to all this is that if you think about it, right around that time, Elton John's Tumbleweed Connection came out, okay, and whenever you read any press from Elton or Bernie Taupin, Bernie was a huge fan of the Old West, and they were also very big fans of music from Big Pink and the Brown album too, and when you listen to Tumbleweed Connection, I can see a total parallel between that that record and music from Big Pink.
And that was also in England, like Clapton. Fairport Convention, another band that would be putting it together from that late era.
Yes. Yeah. And again, there was that. I mean, you mentioned that. I mean, as a curve. I mean, there was Richard and Linda Thompson and my friend Chip Gaddick turned me on to those people. So I mean, it was just this one connection after another, and I'm sure Fred can attest to that fact. That's how the music comes into your life is you read some name or somebody says, well, you like these people, you should check these people out, and then you end up going and buying their records and thinking, how did I miss this? So it's been an interesting ride in that sense musically.
That'll end episode 1 with Tom Ball and his amazing background, taking us all the way from his childhood into the mid-'70s and combining his love for rock and roll as well as the roots music that he's taken on nowadays with not only his radio show but the band Crazy Chestur. Join us for part 2 in 2 weeks as we come back and finish up the episode with Tom Ball. We want to thank you all for listening and tuning in to this important podcast, and we also want to tip the cap to all of you that have voted for us over the years. The past 2 years, we've won the award for the Review Magazine for Best Live Streaming Podcast and our radio show, and we think that we're doing some excellent work here, trying to put together the best of some of Michigan's finest musicians, and Tom Ball is definitely no slouch to that and fits right in here, and we want to thank you all for tuning in and continuing this as we head in to season 4 coming up soon.
The MMHP is hosted on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and our own Libsyn podcast site. You can also search MMHP 989 on Facebook for up-to-the-minute information, as well as both Dr. J and Sir Fred's album picks of the week, posted every weekend. You can connect with Scott on the web at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com. Brought to you by Michigan Rock and Roll Legends, located both inside the Bay County Historical Museum on Washington Avenue, as well as Scotty's Sandbar on Evergreen Drive at the Bay City Middle Grounds.
On behalf of the hosts, Gary, Dr. J. Johnson, Sir Fred Rife, archivist and videographer Mike Beatty, and myself, this podcast wouldn't be here without Studio 163's Alan Garcia, the voice of MMHP, Mr. Eddie Switek, all of our guests, and you, the listeners.
You've been listening to the MMHP and the 989. From all of us at the podcast, we want to thank you for tuning in.